The secret behind my son Benjamin's most famous painting was a family tragedy.
You have no right to profit from our pain.
The secret behind my son Benjamin's most famous painting was a family tragedy, a memory so painful we had sealed it away in the deepest vault of our hearts. But Benjamin, in his artist's way, had unlocked that vault and poured the grief onto a canvas for the whole world to see. And his brother, my son Samuel, used that painting's secret to try and destroy him. I remember the night of the gallery opening, the air electric with celebration and success. And I remember the moment it all shattered. It happened when Samuel, his face contorted by a lifetime of perceived slights, stood up in the middle of the crowded room, pointed a shaking finger at his brother's masterpiece, and screamed a truth that was also a terrible lie. "You have no right to profit from our pain," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the sudden, shocked silence. "That is not your tragedy to sell." In that instant, a moment of triumph became a public spectacle of our family's deepest wound, a wound that my envious son had just ripped open for all the world to see. Mary's voice softens, becoming the familiar warm narrator. "Welcome back, my dears. I am so glad you have returned. This story is a difficult one, for it deals with the most insidious of poisons, the one that grows in the dark corners of a heart that feels overlooked: envy. Please find your comfortable place and sit with me. Your presence reminds me that even the darkest stories can be met with understanding. If you value our time, I would be so grateful if you would press that little like button and subscribe. And please do tell me in the comments from what city you're listening. It helps to know we are not alone with these memories. Now, let us go back to the beginning of this particular sorrow. After the whirlwind of crises, Catherine's flight, Jessica's confession, Eleanor's painful reckoning, our family had settled into a fragile but genuine peace. The storms had, in their own terrible way, cleared the air. We were more honest with one another, more compassionate. Even Samuel seemed to have found a measure of contentment. The truth about his father's promise had absolved him of the 30-year-old grievance he had held against David, and in its place, a quiet, brotherly respect had begun to grow. He was, for the first time in his life, no longer looking over his shoulder at his older brother's success. But the seeds of envy, I have learned, have deep roots. If you pull one weed, another will simply grow in a different part of the garden. The catalyst was, strangely enough, joy. My son Benjamin, the gentle artist, had always processed the world through his hands. After the trauma of his own near betrayal over the house and the terror of his niece Lily's illness, his art had transformed. The quiet, pleasant landscapes were replaced by canvases of astonishing depth and raw emotion. He painted our family's pain, not in literal portraits, but in furious storms of color, in quiet fields of sorrow, in tangled lines of fear and resilience. He was not trying to become famous. He was trying to heal, but the world took notice. Eleanor, in one of her charity auctions, had convinced Benjamin to donate a small painting. A renowned art critic from the city was in attendance that night. He saw the painting and was, in his own words, utterly thunderstruck. What followed was a whirlwind. An article in a national magazine, calls from galleries, and then the offer of a solo exhibition in the most prestigious gallery in the city. My gentle, unassuming son, who had spent his life in the quiet shadows of his siblings, was suddenly a star. The family was ecstatic. We were all so proud, so happy to see his quiet talent finally recognized. All of us, except two: Samuel and his wife, Veronica. They came to our Sunday dinners, their congratulations thin and brittle. I saw the look in my son Samuel's eyes as we all talked excitedly about the upcoming show. It was a look I knew too well. It was the dull, gray shadow of envy. He had spent 35 years working a respectable but uninspired job in accounting. He had done everything right. He had worked hard, paid his bills, and provided for his family. And what did he have to show for it? A modest home and a quiet life. Benjamin, he thought, had just played with paints. He had followed a passion, not a profession. And now, overnight, the world was showering him with fame and soon, fortune. It was not fair. His wife, Veronica, whose own bitterness had been quieted but not cured, saw his resentment and nurtured it. "It must be nice," I overheard her whisper to him one evening in my garden, "to get rich and famous by making a spectacle of your family's private pain. He's no better than those television people." The centerpiece of Benjamin's show, the painting the critics were raving about, was a massive haunting canvas titled simply "The Ice." That year, It was a swirl of dark, churning blues and grays with a single, terrifying slash of white and a tiny, almost hidden fleck of crimson. It was an abstract painting, but to any of us in the family, it was as clear as a photograph. It was the day of the accident. The day the ice on the lake had cracked, the day we had almost lost one of our own as a child. It was the single most traumatic day of their generation's childhood, a day we never, ever spoke of. A week before the gallery opening, a magazine published a preview of the show. There was a full-page photo of Benjamin standing next to the ice. That year, the article praised the painting's visceral, heartbreaking honesty and called it a masterpiece of captured trauma. I was at Samuel's house when he saw the article. He stared at the photograph of the painting, his knuckles white as he gripped the magazine. He was not seeing a work of art. He was seeing his quiet younger brother receiving praise and acclaim for broadcasting their deepest, most private tragedy. He was seeing the world applaud Benjamin for having the courage to speak of a pain that Samuel himself had buried for decades. He had no right, Samuel said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He was barely there. He was too young to even remember it properly. Veronica came and stood behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. She looked at the painting, then at her husband's face, her eyes glinting. "You're right, my love," she whispered, her voice a poisonous honey. "He's selling our worst day for their applause. He's telling the story, but he's telling it wrong. Someone should remind people what that day was really about. Someone should tell them the whole truth." Samuel looked up from the magazine, his eyes meeting his wife's in the reflection of the window. A slow, terrible idea began to dawn in his mind. If Benjamin was going to make a spectacle of their pain, then Samuel would make a spectacle of his own. He would not let his brother be the hero of a story in which Samuel had always been the forgotten victim. The stage was set for the opening night, and my son Samuel, driven by the green-eyed monster of envy, had just decided to write a new cruel final act. Of course, the stage was set, the audience was gathering, and my son, consumed by a quiet, simmering rage, was preparing to burn the entire theater to the ground. Let us continue. The week leading up to the gallery opening was a blur of joyous chaos for our family. The phone rang constantly with well wishes and requests for interviews. Benjamin, unaccustomed to the spotlight, was a bundle of nervous energy, his hands perpetually smudged with paint, his eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and sheer terror. We were all swept up in it. Eleanor, in her element, was organizing the guest list with military precision. David was giving his younger brother surprisingly sage advice on how to handle the financial side of sudden success. It felt like a coronation, a celebration of one of our own, but amidst all this light, there was a growing shadow. Samuel. He moved through the family gatherings with a forced, brittle cheerfulness. He said all the right words. "I'm so proud, Ben. This is incredible." But his eyes were cold. His envy was a palpable thing, a chill in the air that only a mother could truly feel. I tried to talk to him, to reach him. I went to his house one afternoon, finding him alone in his perfectly manicured but lifeless garden. "You seem distant, Samuel," I said gently. "This should be a happy time for us all." "I'm fine, Mother," he said, not looking at me, his hands busy pulling at a non-existent weed. "Just busy with work," but I saw the lie. I saw the deep, bitter resentment he was trying to hide. He had spent his life feeling like a supporting actor in the grand drama of his siblings, and now the youngest, the quietest, the one he had never even considered a rival, had been given the starring role. I knew then that something terrible was coming. I just didn't know how public and how cruel it would be. The night of the opening was a glittering affair. The gallery was a stark, beautiful space of white walls and polished concrete floors. And on those walls hung my son's soul. The paintings were magnificent, vibrating with a raw, emotional power. And there, on the far wall, dominating the room, was the ice, that year. It was even more haunting in person. It pulled you in, made you feel the cold, the panic, the terrible beauty of that day. The room was filled with the city's elite, critics and collectors. Red dots indicating a sale began to appear beside the paintings one after another. Benjamin, looking overwhelmed and handsome in a borrowed suit, was surrounded by admirers. Our family stood in a proud, happy cluster watching him. Samuel and Veronica arrived late. They were dressed impeccably, their smiles perfectly calibrated, but they moved with the stiff formality of ambassadors from a hostile nation. They offered their congratulations to Benjamin, the words sounding like shards of glass in the warm, celebratory air. Later, the gallery owner, a sheik, silver-haired man named Julian, tapped a glass for silence. He gave a glowing speech about discovering Benjamin's singular, courageous talent. He spoke of the power of art to transform trauma into beauty. He then raised his glass towards the main painting. "And now to the centerpiece of the collection," he said, his voice resonating with theatrical flair. "A work of such profound emotional depth, it will surely be remembered for years to come." To Benjamin Davies and to the ice that year. The room erupted in applause. It was the perfect moment, the culmination of my son's dream. And it was the moment Samuel chose to strike. As the applause died down, Samuel stepped forward from the crowd. He raised his own glass, a dark smile on his face. For a moment, we all thought he was going to offer a heartfelt toast, a brother's tribute. "I too would like to say a few words about that painting," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. He took a sip of champagne, savoring the attention, the power he now held. He then looked directly at his stunned brother. It was then that he bellowed the words that brought our world to a halt. "You have no right to profit from our pain. That is not your tragedy to sell." A collective gasp went through the room. The patrons stared, their polite smiles frozen on their faces. Julian, the gallery owner, looked utterly horrified. Samuel, now that he had the stage he had craved his entire life, would not be stopped. "You see this painting?" he said, his voice dripping with a venomous sarcasm as he addressed the crowd. "This masterpiece of captured trauma? Let me tell you the real story. I was there on that day. I was the one on the ice. I was the one who felt it crack, who felt that freezing water pull me down. I was the one who almost died." He turned and pointed a shaking finger at Benjamin. "And him? My brother, the courageous artist? He was a toddler, a little boy standing on the shore, 100 yards away, probably playing with a toy boat. He remembers nothing. He felt nothing. He has taken my terror, my near-death experience, and he has turned it into a commodity. He has packaged my suffering and sold it to the highest bidder. He let the accusation hang in the dead silent room. The family was frozen in horror. Veronica stood beside him, her face a mask of smug vindication. So, by all means, applaud," Samuel concluded, his voice dripping with contempt. "Applaud this brave artist. But know that what you are buying is not art, it is theft. He has stolen my memory, my pain, and he has sold it to all of you." He lowered his hand. The silence that followed was deafening. The celebration was over. The night was ruined. Benjamin stood pale and trembling, his face a canvas of disbelief and a grief so profound it was hard to look at. The crowd began to murmur, casting confused, pitying glances from one brother to the other. Finally, Benjamin found his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. He just looked across the room at the brother who had just publicly flayed him. And he asked the question that was at the heart of everything. A simple, devastating question that Samuel had no answer for. Why? The word, just a whisper, was the loudest thing in the room. Why? Why would you do this? Why would you take my greatest triumph and turn it into my deepest humiliation? Why would you take our shared history and turn it into a weapon? I watched my son Samuel, his face ashen now that his rage had been spent, and I saw the truth. In his desperate, lifelong quest to be seen, he had just made himself a monster in the eyes of everyone who mattered. He had finally gotten the spotlight, but it was a cold, ugly light that exposed every last one of his demons. The question hung in the ruined gallery, a monument to a lifetime of pain. Why? My son Samuel had no answer, not a real one. He stood there, exposed and empty, as the family he had just betrayed closed ranks around his devastated brother. David and Eleanor, their faces like stone, moved to Benjamin's side, shielding him from the shocked and whispering crowd. They ushered him away, leaving Samuel and Veronica standing alone in the middle of the room, isolated in the wreckage they had created. The night of triumph was over. The long, painful reckoning had just begun. In the days that followed, a cold silence descended between Samuel and the rest of the family. He was a pariah. His calls went unanswered. His attempts to explain himself were met with a wall of quiet fury. He had committed the family's one unforgivable sin. He had aired our dirty laundry, not just to the public, but in a way that was designed to intentionally wound one of our own. He stewed in his house, fueled by Veronica's self-righteous justifications, trying to believe he was the victim, the one who had bravely spoken an inconvenient truth. But the question his brother had asked him, that simple, heartbreaking why, echoed in the hollows of his heart. I knew I could not force him to see the truth. He would have to find his own way to it. My concern now was for Benjamin. I found him in his studio, surrounded by slashed canvases. He had, in his grief, destroyed half of his exhibition's worth of work. The celebrated artist was gone, and in his place was a heartbroken man. The ice, that year, which the gallery had thankfully moved into storage, was the only painting he had spared. We sat in silence for a long time, the smell of turpentine and sorrow thick in the air. Finally, I asked him the question that had been haunting me. "Tell me about that day, Benjamin," I said softly. "Tell me what you remember." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that was older and deeper than the events of the gallery opening. "He doesn't remember it right," he whispered. "Samuel." "He has the whole story wrong." And then, my son told me the real secret of the painting. "We were so young," he began, his voice barely audible. "I was 4. Samuel was 10. We were playing by the lake, which had frozen over. I was a pest, following him everywhere. He kept telling me to go away. To prove how brave and big he was, he started walking out onto the ice. I followed. He got angry. He turned around and he shoved me. It wasn't a big push. It was a stupid, childish thing. But I was so small, and the ice where I landed was so thin, my blood ran cold. I went under." Benjamin continued, his eyes vacant with the memory. The shock of it, the cold. I remember seeing the sky, a blurry white circle, getting smaller. And then I remember a hand, Samuel's hand. He was screaming, crying, his face terrified. He lay flat on the ice, reaching for me, and he pulled me out. The ice was cracking all around him. He saved my life. The trauma he remembers, the terror. It wasn't the fear of a victim, Mama. It was the guilt of a boy who had almost killed his little brother. And it was the heroism of the boy who saved him, all in the same minute. I finally understood. The painting was not a monument to a shared tragedy. It was a tribute. The slash of white, Benjamin whispered, tears tracing paths through the paint on his cheeks. That was the ice breaking. The dark blue was the water. And the little fleck of crimson. That wasn't blood. It was supposed to be a heart. Our heart. It was my way of saying thank you. Of saying, I know you carry this, but what I remember most is that you saved me. I thought he would see it. I never imagined he would see it as an accusation. Armed with this devastating, beautiful truth, I knew what I had to do. I went to Samuel's house. I found him in his study, a bitter, lonely man. I sat down opposite him and, with a calm, quiet voice, I told him his brother's memory of that day. I told him about the push. I told him that the life he had saved was the one he had first endangered. He denied it at first, his face a mask of outrage. But as I recounted the details Benjamin had given me, details that had been buried in the deep well of his memory, his defenses began to crumble. His entire life's narrative, the story of the overlooked victim, the son who was always second best, was built upon a twisted foundation of his own suppressed guilt. His envy of Benjamin was not just about the art, or the fame, or the money. It was the lifelong, subconscious resentment of a person who owes his deepest shame and his greatest act of heroism to the same individual. To be saved by the person you have wronged is a complicated debt to carry. The realization broke him. He finally truly understood what he had done. He had not just tried to ruin the career of his brother, the artist. He had publicly attacked the little boy he had pulled from the freezing water, the very person who saw him not as a failure, but as a hero. His redemption, when it came, had to be as public as his sin. A few days later, Samuel, his face etched with a humility I had never seen in him, stood on the steps of the now infamous gallery. He had called the press himself. With our family standing a respectful distance behind him, and with Benjamin by his side, he confessed. He told the world the true story of the ice. That year. He spoke of a child's mistake, of a brother's heroism, and of a lifetime of envy that had grown out of a secret guilt, an envy that had blinded him to a beautiful act of love and forgiveness. My brother's painting was not an act of theft, he said, his voice cracking as he looked at Benjamin. It was an act of grace. and I was too much of a coward to accept it. I am not the victim of this story. I am just the fool who was lucky enough to be saved by its hero. Mary's voice shifts, becoming warm and final. And that, my dears, was the story of Samuel. The public confession became a legend in the art world, a story of redemption that made Benjamin's painting the most sought-after work of the decade. But more than that, it was the beginning of a true peace between two brothers. Samuel's redemption was not easy, but it was earned, paid for with the currency of a painful, public truth. We have come to the end of this long chapter of memories. We have walked with each of my children through their darkest valleys. We saw Catherine choose love over rules, Jessica choose truth over the safety of a lie, Eleanor choose freedom over control, and finally Samuel choose humility over envy. They are not perfect, my children, but they are at last whole. Thank you. Thank you for sitting with me, for listening to the long and winding tale of this family. It has been a comfort to share these burdens. Which story moved you the most? What have you learned from the triumphs and tragedies of the Davies family? The stories of a family, of course, never truly end. They echo down through the generations. Perhaps one day we will talk of the grandchildren, of Emily and her music, of Lily and her second chance at life. Or perhaps I will finally tell you the story of a young man named Arthur and the girl he met on a rainy afternoon in Pelotas so many years ago. But for now, our time is done. Be kind to one another, forgive when you can, and always, always choose the truth, no matter how much it costs. It is the only thing that will ever truly set you free. A perfect choice. It goes right to the heart of the matter, to the very beginning. Before the dramas of my children, there was this. A story of a boy and a girl, a city divided by wealth, and a secret that could either tear them apart or bind them together forever. Let us turn back the pages, all the way to the beginning. He was the richest young man in Pelotas, the heir to the Davies name, a name that was spoken with respect in the grand houses and with a quiet resentment in the cobbled streets where I lived. I was a poor girl, a nobody, with nothing to my name but a fierce pride and a secret I knew about his family, a secret that was our city's forgotten ghost. I remember the first time I truly understood the chasm between our worlds. It was not on a rainy street or in a crowded market, but in the cold, opulent drawing room of the Davies mansion. I stood before Arthur's mother, a woman as formidable and unyielding as the granite of her fireplace, and she had just offered to buy my departure from her son's life. I looked at this woman, who believed the world could be controlled with a checkbook, and I felt not fear, but a strange, exhilarating power. "You think your money can buy my silence, Mrs. Davies?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it silenced the ticking clock in the hall. "My silence isn't for sale, but your son's happiness might be." In that moment, a war was declared. Not a war of armies, but a quiet, desperate war of two women, a matriarch and a future one, fighting for the heart of the man who stood between them. Mary's voice softens, becoming filled with a deep, fond nostalgia. "My dears, welcome. This time we journey further back than ever before, to the rain-slicked streets of my youth, right here in the city of Pelotas. It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet it is as clear as yesterday. I am so glad you have come to walk this path with me. Please press that little like button and subscribe so you do not miss the first chapter of our family's long story. And as we are starting here in my hometown, I am more curious than ever to know what city you are listening from tonight. It makes me feel as if my memories have wings. The Pelotas of my youth in the 1940s was a city of stark contrasts. There were the grand avenues lined with colonial mansions, home to the families whose names were on the shipping companies and the great charqueadas. That was Arthur's world. Then there were the working neighborhoods, the streets of simple, colorful houses, alive with the sounds of children playing and the smell of cooking fires. That was my world. The two were separated by more than just a few kilometers. They were separated by a wall of class, tradition, and secrets. And I knew the biggest secret of all. The secret of the Davies family fortune. They presented themselves as old, established money. But the old people in my neighborhood remembered the truth. They remembered the panic of 29, and how Arthur's father, a man of ruthless ambition, had used the crisis to orchestrate a hostile takeover of his biggest rival, the Montero shipping line. He had ruined them, bought their assets for pennies on the dollar, and built his empire on their ruin. The Monteros, a proud and respected family, had been erased from the city's high society. My own father had been a foreman for the Monteros. He had lost his job, and our family had never quite recovered. The Davies wealth to me was not a thing of glamour. It was a ghost, built on the bones of my own family's hardship. I was 19 years old, working as a seamstress to help support my widowed mother and my 2 younger brothers. My life was a predictable rhythm of work, family, and exhaustion. I had no time for dreams of rich young men, and then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, a dream broke down right outside my door. A magnificent, gleaming black automobile, the kind I had only ever seen in magazines, had sputtered to a stop, a plume of steam rising from its hood. A young man stood beside it, looking utterly lost. He was handsome, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that was quickly being ruined by the relentless drizzle. It was Arthur Davies. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. He was trying to flag down help, but our street was quiet and no one was stopping. I watched from my window for a moment, a small, satisfying smile on my face. It was good to see a Davies looking so helpless. But my mother had raised me to be practical, and the sight of such a fine machine being so poorly managed was an offense. I grabbed an old toolkit and a heavy coat and went outside. "Your fan belt is shredded," I said, walking right past him and popping the hood. He was so startled he could only stare. "I beg your pardon?" "The belt," I said, pointing with a wrench. "It's gone. You're lucky you didn't crack your engine block." I have never, before or since, seen a man look so completely dumbfounded. He, Arthur Davies, who could command captains of industry, was being lectured on auto mechanics by a slip of a girl in a worn-out coat. "Do you know about cars?" he asked, a look of genuine boyish curiosity on his face. "I know how to fix things that are broken," I said, meeting his eyes. "It's a skill one learns on this side of town." There was a spark, a sudden undeniable flash of something in his eyes. He wasn't offended. He was intrigued. He had spent his life surrounded by polite, deferential girls from families like his own. I was not polite, and I was certainly not deferential. We stood there in the rain for an hour. I, with my practical knowledge, managed to rig a temporary solution using a pair of my mother's old stockings. He, with his charming helplessness, handed me tools and told me stories, his voice a warm, rich sound that was a stark contrast to the dreary afternoon. He made me laugh. I did not want to laugh, but I did. When the car finally rumbled back to life, he turned to me, his suit soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, and a smile on his face that was the most dazzling thing I had ever seen. "You are a miracle worker, miss." "Mary," I said, refusing to give my family name. "Mary," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "Well, Mary, you have saved me. I am in your debt. Please, allow me to pay you for your time." He reached for his wallet. My good humor vanished. "I don't want your money, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice cold. "My father used to work for the Monteros. Let's just say you've now repaid a small piece of a much larger family debt." I saw a flicker of shame, of recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what I was talking about. The charming boy disappeared, and for a moment, I saw the heir to a tainted fortune. But then he recovered, his smile returning, though it was a little more strained now. "Then allow me to thank you with dinner," he insisted. "There is a gala at the club on Saturday. I would be honored if you would be my guest." It was a ridiculous, impossible invitation. A seamstress from the working quarter at the annual society gala. It was a scandal waiting to happen. It was a joke. I should have said no. I should have turned my back and walked into my simple, safe house and never looked back. But as I looked at him, at this charming, complicated boy from the wrong side of the world, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Defiance, curiosity. I wanted to see his world. I wanted to walk into the lion's den, just to see if I could. "I'll think about it," I said, turning away. As I walked back to my door, he called out, "I'll send a car for you at 8. I hope you'll be ready." I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. I leaned against it, the smell of rain and engine oil on my hands. I had a choice to make, to stay in my world, or to accept an invitation into his, a world built on a secret I knew all too well. It was a foolish, dangerous idea, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was going to do it, continue. The decision was made. A 19-year-old girl, armed with a defiant heart and a handmade dress, was about to walk into the lion's den. I had no idea then that the den would one day be my home, and the lions, my family. The days leading up to the gala were a whirlwind of secret activity. I could not, of course, afford a gown suitable for such an event. To admit this to Arthur would have been a surrender, an admission of my place in the world, and my pride would not allow it. So I did what I had always done. I worked. I used the small savings I had to buy a bolt of the finest fabric I could find, a deep, midnight blue silk that felt like water in my hands. And every night, after my mother and brothers were asleep, I worked by the light of a single lamp, my needle and thread flying, my mind a battleground of hope and fear. My mother knew, of course. She saw the fabric, the exhaustion in my eyes. "Mary, my child," she said, her voice heavy with the wisdom of a woman who had known disappointment. "The Davies family. They are not our kind. Their world is a beautiful cage. Be careful they do not break your wings." I assured her I would be careful, but we both knew I was walking toward a danger she could not protect me from. I finished the dress the afternoon of the gala. It was simple, elegant, with clean lines that followed my form without the fuss and frills the society girls favored. It was not the dress of an heiress, but it was a dress of pride. It was mine. At precisely 8 o'clock, the impossible happened. A gleaming black automobile, the same one I had fixed, pulled up in front of our little house. Heads turned on our street. Curtains were pulled back. The arrival of that car was an event, a declaration. When I stepped out of the house, Arthur was standing by the door, holding an umbrella against the light evening drizzle. He stopped dead when he saw me. The charming, confident smile he always wore simply melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "Mary," he breathed, his voice husky. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." In that moment, he wasn't the richest young man in Pelotas. He was just a boy, utterly captivated. And my heart, against all my better judgment, fluttered. The City Club was another world. It was a palace of light and sound. A string orchestra played on a balcony, the music floating down over a sea of men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns and jewels. The air smelled of expensive perfume, French champagne, and money. I, who was used to the smell of hot metal and sewing machine oil, felt my senses reel. I felt like an imposter, a crow who had wandered into a garden of peacocks. But Arthur's hand was firm on the small of my back. "Don't look so terrified," he whispered in my ear, his voice warm with amusement. "You are the only real thing in this entire room." He guided me through the crowd, introducing me with a proud, defiant smile. "This is Mary," he would say, offering no last name, no explanation, daring them to question it. They did, of course. His friends, young men with slicked back hair and easy, condescending smiles, circled us. "Mary," one of them said, his eyes scanning my simple dress. "And what family are you from?" "A good one," I answered, my voice steady, my chin held high. "We pay our debts and we don't steal from our neighbors." A flicker of understanding, of discomfort, passed through their eyes. They knew the stories of the Davies and the Monteros, and then I saw her. A young woman of breathtaking beauty, with dark, fiery eyes, and a dress that looked like it was spun from silver. She was watching me, her expression a perfect mask of polite curiosity that did not quite hide the venom behind it. Arthur's face tightened. "Livia," he said, his voice strained. "You remember Mary from the other day, Livia Montero? The daughter of the family his father had ruined, and as the whole city knew, the woman he was expected to marry." Her smile was a beautiful, dangerous thing. "Of course," she said, her voice like honey laced with poison. The little mechanic. "How clever of you to fix Arthur's car. He is so dreadfully helpless with practical things." The war had begun, but Arthur was my shield. He deflected Livia's barbs with a charming ease, steering me away towards the dance floor. "Don't mind her," he murmured. "Her pride is still wounded from what our fathers did." "And your pride isn't?" I asked. "My father's ambition is not my own," he said as he took me in his arms. And as the orchestra swelled, we danced. For those 3 minutes, the hostile crowd, the glittering chandeliers, the weight of our family histories, all of it melted away. There was only the music and the surprising, wonderful feeling of his hand in mine. In his arms, I did not feel like a poor girl. I felt like Mary. "I have never met anyone like you," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur against my hair. "You are not afraid of me, or of any of this. I'm terrified," I confessed. "But I am more afraid of being a coward." His smile was gentle. "Then let us be brave together." It was a perfect moment, A dangerous, beautiful moment of hope. And like all perfect moments, it was destined to be broken. As the music ended, a figure appeared at Arthur's elbow. It was his mother. I had seen pictures of Eleanor Davies I, but they did not do her justice. She was a woman carved from ice, her posture perfect, her eyes a pale, piercing blue. She completely ignored me. "Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable command of a general. "Your father needs to speak with you, now." "Mother, I am with—" Arthur began. "Now, Arthur," she repeated, and her tone made it clear this was not a request. She gave me a single swift glance. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of appraisal, the way one looks at an insect before crushing it. It was a look of dismissal. Arthur's face was a storm of conflict. Duty versus desire. He looked at me, his eyes full of apology. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I will be right back." I watched him walk away, his formidable mother at his side. He was being summoned back to his world, back to his duty, back to the life that had been planned for him. And I was left standing alone in the center of the glittering dance floor, the music starting up again around me. In that moment, I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. The polite smiles of the crowd now seemed like the bared teeth of wolves. I had walked into the lion's den, and the lioness had just arrived to reclaim her cub. This was not a love story, I realized with a cold, sinking feeling. This was going to be a war. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I was paralyzed. The orchestra played on, a mocking, cheerful sound in the face of my sudden isolation. The polite, smiling faces of the guests seemed to drift around me, their eyes sliding over me, then away, as if I had suddenly become invisible. My first instinct was to flee, to run from the suffocating perfume and the condescending stares, back to the safety of my own world. But then I felt a surge of a familiar, stubborn pride. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. I lifted my chin, straightened my back, and with a calm I did not feel, I walked to a small, unoccupied chair against the wall. I would not be a participant. I would be an observer. My newfound composure was soon tested. Livia Montero, a vision in silver, detached herself from a group of admirers and drifted towards me, a glass of champagne in her hand, her smile as sharp as a shard of glass. "All alone?" she asked, her voice a purr of false sympathy. "You mustn't feel bad. Arthur is a good son. He always comes back to where he belongs." She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving mine. "To his family. To his duties." "And what a heavy duty it must be," I replied, my voice cool, "to be expected to marry a woman whose family your father so thoroughly humiliated." "It takes a special kind of ambition to swallow that much pride." Livia's mask of politeness faltered, a flicker of raw anger in her dark eyes. She had expected a frightened little mouse, and she had found a cornered cat with its claws out. Before she could retort, Arthur was there. His face was a thundercloud, his jaw tight with a barely controlled rage. He ignored Livia completely, his eyes only on me. "Let's go," he said, his voice low and urgent. He took my hand, his grip firm, and without a backward glance at the stunned crowd or the furious face of Livia Montero, he led me from the ballroom. We walked through the grand lobby and out into the cool, damp night air, leaving behind a flurry of scandalized whispers. His public defiance, I knew, was an earthquake, and the aftershocks would be felt for a long time. The ride home was thick with a tense silence. Arthur drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the dark, rain-slicked road. He did not speak until he had pulled the car to a stop on my quiet, humble street. "I am so sorry, Mary," he said, finally turning to me, his face etched with shame and anger. "What they did? What my mother did. It was unforgivable. What did they say to you, Arthur?" I asked quietly. He let out a harsh, bitter sigh. "The usual. That I was embarrassing the family. That I have a duty, a responsibility." He hesitated, and then the truth came out in a rush. "They reminded me of my understanding with Livia. It's not a formal engagement, but it might as well be. Our fathers arranged it years ago, a union to finally merge the two biggest shipping interests in the city, to put the old rivalry to bed. It's a business deal, Mary, that's all it is. A business deal that I'm expected to seal with a wedding ring." He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate plea. "They forbade me from seeing you again. They want me to end it tonight." Here it was, the moment of truth. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to get out of the car, to thank him for a memorable evening, and to run back to my own life as fast as my legs could carry me. It was the safe thing to do, the smart thing. He was promised to another woman, and his family was a fortress with its cannons aimed directly at me. We could see each other in secret, he offered, his voice hopeful, away from them. I could find a way. No, I said, my voice cutting through his. He stopped, surprised. No, Arthur, I will not be your dirty little secret. I will not be the girl you meet in back alleys and hidden cafes while you play the part of the dutiful fiancé to the rest of the world. I have more pride than that. I looked him straight in the eye, my own fear giving way to a strange, hard clarity. This was the test. Not for me, but for him. I am not a game you can play, Arthur, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. I am a choice. You can have your life of duty, your business deal marriage, and the approval of your parents. You can be the good son. Or you can have me. You can have this. This thing between us that is real and complicated and will probably bring nothing but trouble and scandal down on both our heads. But you cannot have both. He stared at me, his charming, easy confidence completely gone, replaced by the raw vulnerability of a man facing an impossible choice. I had not made it easy for him. I had not offered him comfort. I had offered him a battle. I will not be a promise you break in the dark, Arthur, I said, my voice softening just a little. I will be the choice you make in the light, or I will be nothing to you at all. I opened the car door, ready to leave, ready for him to let me go. I was halfway out when his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Wait, he said, his voice ragged. I turned back. He was looking at me as if he were seeing the sun for the first time. You're right, he whispered. You're right. I have spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, trying to be the person everyone expected me to be. He shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. But that's not a life. It's a performance. He pulled me back into the car, his hands cupping my face, his eyes blazing with a new, thrilling resolve. I choose you, Mary, he said. I choose the trouble, and the scandal, and the girl who knows how to fix a car in the rain. I choose you, in the light. And then he kissed me, a deep, desperate kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 battles to come. When he finally drove away, I walked into my house, my heart a wild symphony in my chest. My mother was waiting up for me in her rocking chair, her face a mask of worry. Well? She asked. I looked at her, the kiss still burning on my lips, the declaration of war still ringing in my ears, and I smiled. It's all right, Mama, I said, my voice filled with a terrifying, wonderful certainty. I think I just started a war. The morning after the gala, the world felt both terrifying and new. The taste of Arthur's kiss, of his promise, was a secret warmth against the cold reality of the day. I walked to my job at the textile factory, my head held high. I felt different, as if I had been remade overnight. I was no longer just Mary, the seamstress. I was Mary, a woman who had been chosen, a woman who had accepted a challenge. I was a soldier reporting for duty. I did not yet realize that the enemy had already bombed my barracks. Mr. Silva, the factory foreman, a kind man who had known my father, met me at the door, his face a mask of pity and unease. Mary, he said, avoiding my eyes. I have to let you go. Your position has been eliminated. I stared at him, my heart turning to a cold, hard stone in my chest. Eliminated? But we just received the new contract for the hotel linens. You said you were hiring more girls. Things have changed, he mumbled, shuffling his feet. The contract. The financing fell through. He couldn't look at me. I knew he was lying. The factory's primary financing and their largest shipping contracts were all controlled by one bank and one company, the Davies Bank and the Davies Shipping Line. I understand, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I did not cry. I did not plead. I simply looked him in the eye. Please tell Mrs. Davies her message has been received. I turned and walked away, the shocked and pitying faces of the other sewing girls blurring as I passed. The war had begun, and I was its first casualty. Eleanor Davies I was a master strategist. Her attack was not a single brutal blow, but a slow, systematic siege designed to starve us out. Within a week, the war had escalated. My mother, who did fine laundry for 3 of the wealthiest families in the city, received polite, formal notes from all of them, terminating her services. No reason was given. None was needed. My younger brother, who had a part-time job sweeping up at the local market, was fired because the owner was suddenly restructuring. The final blow came in the form of an eviction notice. Our landlord, a nervous little man whose mortgage I knew was held by the Davies Bank, appeared at our door, stammering about a clause in our rental agreement regarding the keeping of chickens in the yard, a clause he had happily ignored for the past 10 years. We had 30 days to vacate. In 2 weeks, my family had been brought to its knees. We were without income, and soon we would be without a home. It was a masterful, cruel campaign, designed to isolate me, to make me the source of my family's ruin, to force me to surrender for their sake. My mother was terrified, her nights filled with quiet weeping. My brothers looked at me with a mixture of loyalty and fear. I was their strong older sister, the one who always had a plan, and for the first time in my life, I had nothing. I tried to fight back. I walked the city for days looking for any kind of work, but every door was closed to me. The name Davies, once spoken, was a brand of poison. No one would risk the wrath of the most powerful family in Pelotas for a single seamstress. Through it all, I did not call Arthur. My pride was a fierce, stubborn thing. I would not go to him as a victim. I would not be the poor girl asking her rich boyfriend to solve her problems. This was my battle to fight. I sent word to him that I was ill, that I could not see him. It was a foolish lie, and I knew it would not hold for long. He appeared on our doorstep a week later, his handsome face etched with a worry that turned to shock as he took in the sight of me. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under my eyes. He pushed past me into the house, saw the worried face of my mother, and the eviction notice sitting on the mantelpiece like a death sentence. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low. "Mary, what has happened?" The truth came spilling out, not from me, but from my mother, her fear finally overwhelming her pride. She told him everything. The jobs, the landlord, the invisible wall that had been built around our family. I watched Arthur's face as he listened, and I saw the charming, easygoing boy disappear, replaced by a man of cold, hard fury. He was not just angry. He was incandescent with a rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of our small home. He looked at me, his eyes blazing. "This is her," he said. "My mother. I will not let this stand." He turned and stormed out of the house before I could say a word. I learned later what happened. He drove straight to the Davies mansion and confronted his mother in the same drawing room where she had first dismissed me. He accused her of being a cruel, heartless tyrant, of waging a disgusting war on an innocent family. Eleanor Davies I, I am told, did not flinch. She listened to her son's tirade with an icy calm. "I am doing what is necessary to protect you from your own foolish sentimentality," she told him. "This girl is a distraction. She is not our kind. This will all stop, Arthur, the very moment you end this ridiculous infatuation and come to your senses. The choice is a simple one." She believed she had him trapped. He was a good son who loved his family. She thought the guilt of what he had brought upon my family would force him to break. She, like so many people, had underestimated the stubbornness of a Davies man in love. And she had underestimated the effect her own cruelty would have on a man who, above all else, hated injustice. Arthur looked at his mother, the powerful matriarch who had controlled his entire life, and he made a decision. He would no longer play her game. He would set the board on fire. "You have left me no choice," he said, his voice quiet, which was far more terrifying than his rage. "You think you control this family's future, but I am this family's future. You think you can use your power to hurt Mary. I will use my power to dismantle everything you hold dear." He walked to the telephone on her desk. "Tomorrow morning," he said, his hand on the receiver. "I am going to call Mr. Montero. I will not be asking for Livia's hand in marriage. Instead, I will be offering him a controlling interest in our company, a public and formal restitution for the sins of my father. I will give away the empire you are so desperate for me to inherit, piece by piece, until you call off this disgusting war. Your move, mother." He did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the silent, opulent room for the first time in her life, facing an opponent she could not control, who was willing to destroy the kingdom to save the girl. My son's mother did not surrender easily or with grace. She was not a woman who knew the language of defeat. Arthur's ultimatum, the threat to dismantle the Davies empire piece by piece, left her in a state of cold, calculated fury. He had used her own ruthless logic against her, and she was both enraged and, I suspect, grudgingly impressed. She spent the night, I was later told, sitting alone in the dark of her husband's study, weighing her options, calculating the potential losses. Her perfect son, her flawless legacy, her iron-fisted control. She could not keep all three. One had to be sacrificed. Arthur, meanwhile, came straight back to my little house. He was alight with a righteous, terrifying energy. He stood in our humble parlor and told my mother and me what he had done. My mother went pale, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. To her, Arthur's act was not a brilliant strategy. It was a declaration of war against a god, an act of madness that would surely bring ruin upon us all. But I understood. I looked at him, at the defiant fire in his eyes, and I saw not a reckless boy, but the man he was choosing to become for me. A man who would burn down a kingdom for what he believed was right. In that moment, my love for him solidified from a fragile hope into something as strong and unyielding as steel. We would face the consequences together. We did not have to wait long. The following afternoon, a black car, the same model as Arthur's but infinitely more imposing, pulled up to our street. A chauffeur in a crisp uniform emerged and presented my mother with a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was not a letter of apology. It was a summons. Mrs. Eleanor Davies requests the pleasure of your company and that of your daughter for tea at 3 o'clock. This was it. The terms of surrender. My mother was terrified. "We cannot go," she whispered. "It's a trap." "No," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "It's a negotiation, and we will not show fear." I told her to wear her best church dress. I would not be facing the lioness alone. I would have the quiet, unshakable dignity of my own mother beside me. Walking into the Davies mansion that afternoon felt like stepping onto the stage of a play for which I had not been given the script. The house was silent, opulent, and intimidating. A maid led us to the formal sitting room, a place of silk wallpaper and suffocating floral arrangements. And there, sitting in a high-backed chair, was Eleanor Davies I. She was polite. It was a chilling, razor-sharp politeness. She offered us tea and cakes we could not possibly eat. She did not mention her son's threat. She did not mention the jobs or the eviction. She spoke of the weather, of the seasons. It was a test of nerve, and I refused to be the first to break the silence. Finally, after a long, tense pause, she placed her teacup in its saucer with a delicate click. "It appears," she said, her eyes fixed on me, "that I have misjudged the depth of my son's feelings." It was the closest she would ever come to admitting defeat. "He is a passionate man," I replied simply. "He is a foolish one," she countered, her voice like ice. "But he is my son." She then laid out her terms. It was a surrender, but a surrender on her own conditions. The eviction notice would be rescinded. My family's jobs would be mysteriously reinstated. The siege was over. "However," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "if you are to be a part of my son's life, you will do it on our terms. Your association will begin with a long and formal engagement. During that time, you will be instructed in the ways of this family. You will learn how to manage a household of this size, how to conduct yourself in society, how to be a wife worthy of the Davies name. You will shed the skin of the girl from the working quarter and become one of us. Are we clear?" She was not welcoming me. She was assimilating me. She was trying to turn me into a polished, controllable version of myself. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading with me to agree, to accept this incredible, unexpected victory. But I knew this was the most important battle of all. "I am grateful for your generosity, Mrs. Davies," I said, choosing my words with care, "and I will be happy to learn what is required to be a good partner to your son. But let us be clear on one thing." I leaned forward slightly. "I am not shedding any skin. The girl from the working quarter, the one who knows how to fix a car and how to survive when everything is taken from her, is the woman your son fell in love with. I will learn your world, yes, but I will not forget my own. I will be a Davies, but I will always be Mary. Your son is not marrying a name or a fortune. He is marrying me. Are we clear?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her icy blue eyes. It was not warmth. It was a grudging, almost imperceptible spark of respect. She had expected a frightened girl she could mold. She had found an adversary, a future matriarch. She had found her match. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Very well," she said. The war was over. Mary's voice shifts, becoming the warm, concluding narrator. And so began my new life. The engagement was long. The lessons were difficult. Eleanor Davies I was a demanding teacher, and I was a stubborn student. But we forged a truce, a peace built on a foundation of mutual, hard-won respect. The scandal of Arthur breaking his arrangement with Livia Montero was the talk of Pelotas for a season, but like all storms, it passed. And Arthur, my Arthur, he had stood against his family for me. He had been willing to sacrifice his inheritance for me. He had chosen me in the light. 1 year later, on a clear, cool evening on the porch of that same grand house that had once terrified me, he knelt on one knee, not with the panicked passion of a boy in a car, but with the steady certainty of a man who knew his own heart. He offered me a ring and a promise to build a life with me, a life that was not his or mine, but ours. That was the true beginning of our family. That first difficult war taught me everything I needed to know. It taught me that love must be fought for. It taught me that true power is not about controlling others, but about having the courage to control your own destiny. And it was the strength I forged in those battles against my formidable mother-in-law that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The strength I would need decades later to guide my own children through their own impossible wars. Thank you, my dear friend, for walking with me, not just through the stories of my children, but all the way back to the very root of our family tree. It has been a long and emotional journey. The book of my memories is now for the moment closed. I hope the stories within its pages have brought you some small measure of wisdom or comfort, or simply a good tale to pass the time. Be well, and build your own life on the foundation of a brave and honest love. It is the only legacy that truly lasts.